Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the South Texas Power Lunch. I'm here with Jennifer Newell. Thank you so much for coming here today to talk about Betty's Co. and all the exciting things you're doing here in San Antonio.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
This is going to be a great conversation about what it really looks like to raise money in an early stage. And then more importantly than that, what is it like for women entrepreneurs in our community as they try to grow these innovations that we so desperately need in our community? Let's do like we always do, which is let's talk a bit about the journey for you, your founder's journey, and then also let's talk about the Betty Co. story. But let's start with the founder's journey. Tell us about Jennifer.
Oh, goodness. My founder story. So I am a Nashville native. I've been in San Antonio now for about 10 years. And when I was in Nashville after college, I was a music business major in Nashville in college.
Music business major. That's a great place to be.
Yes, it really is. I have a fun anecdote about the music business and healthcare that I'll come back to.
Okay.
But I found my way into a career in healthcare after about a year out of school. And I worked for a consulting company that did mostly physician practice management. We would go into these large health system-owned medical groups, turn them around. I did business development and marketing, which means I spent most of my time on the other end of the phone with, medical group CEOs and health system CEOs who would talk about how hard it is to run any type of physician organization.
And it still is today.
Still is today. That's how I kind of cut my teeth. Was there with that company. The consulting company I was with got bought by a large company called the Advisory Board based out of DC. Stayed with that company for about 10 years.
Okay.
And in that time, my husband and I moved to San Antonio. We've been in San Antonio now, as I mentioned, for 10 years, and moved here for his job, so I kept working remotely. Fast forward from the time we moved here in 2012 to 2017, early 2017, I started to just think about women's healthcare really differently. And at this point, I loved my career. I was on the path to be, future looking. I wanted to be a chief marketing officer for a large company, maybe even eventually one day a Fortune 500 company. Loved that. Was thinking about going back to business school. I still loved healthcare, was passionate about it, but I just had this thing that just kept nagging at me when it came to women's healthcare. And I really think it was on the heels of, the 2016 election when people are talking about, very large political topics. And I found myself really frustrated with how people talked about women's healthcare with such a narrow view. So aside from my career in healthcare, I also had, of course, my own experiences as a woman who was a patient. And so I actually started seeing a gynecologist when I was in my late teens. I was diagnosed really early with a condition that causes infertility. And I spent from about 17 to 23, I had to navigate the healthcare system just all on my own. And it was challenging and unwelcoming, and in some cases pretty traumatic. And, I learned so much through that experience, like how to advocate for myself as a patient, what women's healthcare really meant, how comprehensive it is. I learned about, female anatomy and physiology and how the menstrual cycle really affects so much about how a woman feels daily, on a daily basis, and how that changes. And so, to make a long story short, I was having a lot of conversations with women about women's healthcare, and so many of them did not understand the things that I did through my experiences as a patient. And maybe they started to, if they, had children, had biological children, and had been pregnant and started to learn that way. But at this point, that's most of my peers were in their late 20s at the time they started to have children. So, you have a long stretch of time where women were not getting the information that they needed. And so all of that just culminated into this concept for Betty's, where, we are women's healthcare for Gen Z women, really focused on the age range of 15 to 24.
Okay.
But, for me as a founder, I kind of thought, oh my gosh, can I do this? I've known nothing about starting a company. I know about healthcare.
Sure.
I have a lot of great resources in healthcare. I know about women's health. And I just started to dig in and do research and really thinking through, what is it that women really need to change the conversation in this country about women's healthcare?
So let me ask you on this, because you have a fascinating story. you're on the career path of, large organizations career. You see the opportunity, you feel the opportunity, right? You see the need. Talk a little bit, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but talk a little bit about that where you go, I'm doing it. Like, I see it, I'm ready. Like, I was on this path over here. Nope, I'm going to go on this other path. Can you talk about, because there had to have been a lot of, were you I tip a toe, tried it out, that's not too bad, the water's okay, and then I jump in? Or did you just go like one day to your husband, guess what? I filed this company, we now have Betty's Pet. Which one was it?
Oh, a part of me wishes it was the latter, but it's a little bit more of the former.
Okay.
That I started doing light research.
Okay.
And then, so from probably very end of 2016, maybe December.
2016.
December to probably a couple months after that, the thought of a place for younger women really kind of came into my mind. And at that moment, I thought, okay, this really feels like something.
Okay.
And this feels like it could be something really big and really important. And I know that I have a little bit of a personality that I can get really excited about something,
Sure.
and then I just get busy and I get in my day-to-day, my routine, and then it goes away.
Okay.
So I gave myself that time.
Okay.
And that was my litmus test. If 3 months from now I'm not excited about this, then I don't
Sure.
need to do this. And so I didn't give myself a specific timeline, but I did, think through, okay, if this is not something that is top of mind on an ongoing basis, then I just need to let it die out. But it did the opposite. It just grew and grew
It just
and
kept
grew
percolating
in my
and
mind.
growing.
Yes.
Okay.
And I can't remember the date, the first time I talked to somebody at my company. I want to say it was probably summer of 2017. So I probably gave it a good, after that point, 4 or 5 months of continuing to be excited about doing the research after
Right.
hours, doing work, developing the business model, and all of that, until I was like, okay, I need to share this with someone to figure out what does the next step even look like.
Sure.
To think I'm going to go do this and start this company, because I had no idea how to do that. I never wanted to be an entrepreneur.
So, and part of this I want to talk about is this ideation to operation, right? And some people just think, oh, you just start a startup. And It's really not like that. There's a reason it's not. But a lot of people get a great idea. This, Remarkable has tons of ideas. I don't know if they're great or not, right? But they do no good when they're just sitting on paper.
Right.
How did you figure out, like, what's my next step to go and see if this is a good idea, not just an idea? What was that like for you?
Yeah, I think because I had a marketing background, I at least knew how to do a little bit of market research.
Okay.
So I started at first by looking at the competitive landscape.
Sure.
Right? Like what is out there that
Yep.
could be similar to this. And I found that there really wasn't anything that was exactly like what I wanted to build. Or
Nothing
even
hyper-focused, right? There are
Right.
people providing services, and there's a lot, but nobody
Exactly.
hyper-focused.
Yep.
And definitely not on the patient aspect, more on the
Exactly.
service aspect, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
I talked to a couple of trusted people in the industry specifically.
Okay.
And then I talked to potential customers. So
Okay.
parents and young women, just kind of shared, here's my idea. And I did not do this in a really great market research way of,
Right.
really
Control group and
yes.
get them in for
No.
focus studies
Right.
and all those
Right.
things, right?
I didn't ask them the questions of what do you want to see in a healthcare
Yeah.
provider,
Right.
to be a little bit, to give them an unbiased opportunity. But I asked questions and said, this is what I'm thinking about doing. And I got a lot of positive feedback. So then I thought, okay, then what? Then what do I do? Luckily, my husband has a good network in San Antonio, and he had been kind of somewhat infiltrating the startup space. So he was familiar with some of the resources here in San Antonio.
Okay.
And with that, we at least knew, we didn't tap anyone on the shoulder immediately, but we knew that there were people and resources available to help with the startup elements. And so that was extremely helpful and comforting to know, okay,
Right.
there are people out there who do this. This is a thing that, happens. There's an entire industry of entrepreneurship.
That's
which
right.
Completely foreign to me.
That's right. That's right. So
and-
most people, they don't realize
Right.
there is resources.
Yeah.
There are resources that are available. You don't just kind of wing it.
Exactly.
You don't have to.
Right. You don't have to. We also talked to some other friends who own their own businesses. They started local small businesses. And so they worked with the Small Business Development Center and went the SBA route.
Sure.
So we just talked to them through casual conversation and got some information from there. And with those resources, tried to piecemeal together, okay, what are the components that we need to
Right.
get this off the ground? Again, I had a lot of, I have a large healthcare network, so I was
Right.
able to lean on them for
get
elements
feedback.
of the business model.
Right.
Yeah, to pressure test that, to understand the financials, which certainly kind of had the foundation
Right.
for the business.
So let's talk about Betty's.
Yeah.
Because it is a very complex and I think very well thought out business model and service delivery that you do. Again, a lot of people do service, like you can go to the doctor,
Right.
but you really do have a comprehensive approach. Can you talk a little bit about that, about Betty's and what that approach is?
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I'll say is that kind of connecting the dots here, the process I just described of like leaning on those resources, working through financial models, tapping my network,
Yeah.
that was months, if not a year of planning
Right.
just to get to the point of having some type of model
Right.
that I had the ability to put on paper. That's another thing, is taking the idea and putting it on paper is really important,
Right.
because then you flesh out all of those details that you wouldn't otherwise have to do if you didn't sit
That's
down
right.
and write a paragraph about, well, how are you going to do this?
That's right. And it allows somebody else to come in and provide what's in your brain and feedback to it. to
Exactly.
have- it's an iterative process.
Exactly.
So getting it out on paper is a big way to do that.
And that's really what led to some of the unique design elements of Betty's,
Okay.
the complexities of Betty's. So we provide gynecology, mental health, and wellness care to younger women, Gen Z, women plus. So that includes non-binary and trans individuals as well. And so we provide this care in two settings, which is really what makes us unique. We're focused on meeting young women where they are. So we provide care virtually. And so we have built that technology on our own. We have a custom care portal for our
Okay.
patients to engage with us and for us to engage with our patients. But we also provide in-person care in a mobile clinic. So this way we can go to college campuses, we can go to workplaces in the neighborhoods where women kind of live and work and shop. So interesting things about our approach is we are working with a population that tends just not to get care,
Right.
They're in kind of survival mode.
Sure.
If it's not broke, there's nothing that needs to be fixed. They just don't know that it's broken.
Well, and they're not used in that age. I remember being at that age, right, where I'm now out where a mom or a dad or a family member was looking out for my wellness.
Right.
They were scheduling the doctor's appointments to now I'm kind of free. So, well, if it's not broke, don't fix it type
Right.
thing. And if nobody else is making the appointment, they just don't happen.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
They just don't happen.
Right. And so for those with a female reproductive system, that pain that comes every month is really, intense and somewhat excruciating for a couple of days out of the month. But, the other, 28 days, it's fine. So I can survive for those 2 days. And so then, there's this normalization of painful symptoms and conditions that women tend to live with.
Wow.
So our first step is just normalizing women's health care and getting them in the doors to talk, right? It's not even providing care. It is, having an awareness that they actually do need care. And it's important to go at a minimum of once a year, even though our patients tend to come to see us 2 to 3 times a year.
Okay.
So we have created, a part of the meeting young women where they are is to facilitate that interaction.
Okay.
But we also do this in a different way through our brand. So we have a lot of content on Instagram and on our website. We do a pop-up retail space called the Awkward Shop, where we're selling women's health products, so period care products, sexual wellness products, as well as just some fun gifts.
The
So
awkward shop?
yeah, the Awkward Shop.
okay.
You like that?
It is. I mean, I get it. I mean, especially to a man, it resonates to
Yeah.
that to me pretty well.
Well, think about it. It's there in HEB or Walgreens or wherever you go for your groceries or your pharmacy.
Right.
There is one aisle, and they have stuffed
And everybody knows
everything.
what you're on that aisle for
Yes.
if you're in that aisle. That's
Right.
true.
Everything awkward is on that aisle.
HEB, if you're listening, you could move it around a little bit.
Yeah. Let's think about. We will partner with you.
There you
Give
go.
us a call. We
There's
would love to help
Betty's
you
that would fit right into that space.
rethink how to lay that out. So we do, and in that pop-up retail environment, it just gives women the opportunity to come in, check out our space, ask questions. Even if they don't buy anything, it's just a great way for us to start a dialogue with them.
That's great.
So that was kind of the first pieces for us, is how do we get women into a safe environment where they can ask questions and learn and educate them. Then the other piece is how we actually deliver care, like the services that we provide.
Right.
So we've decided to take obstetrical care out of our practice, right? Most gynecological practices also have pregnancy care.
Right.
So we don't, because most of the women that we serve aren't trying to get pregnant.
Right.
And we know that, one of the reasons why there's so much stigma around women's health care is because we talk about it at the point of pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
So, right, a person is either trying to prevent, achieve, or manage a pregnancy. And if that's not what they're trying to do, then they don't need women's health care. That is the message that most women hear.
Interesting.
Yes. And so we are, by taking the pregnancy care out of the equation, we are really hoping to educate women on, you need to start seeing a gynecologist by the age of 15. That's the recommendation. 13 to 15, you have your first gynecological visit, just for conversation and education.
Sure.
And to start tracking. So that we can understand underlying conditions or other needs that they might have. So that's the second piece, is the actual care that we deliver. And then the third is how we deliver it. So we have really reconstructed the care experience from start to finish. So our patients can schedule their appointment, check in, ask questions, basically do just about everything except for have their visit through the portal and through the technology,
Nice.
and they manage that themselves.
Okay.
And we'll send notifications and reminders, and everything is a branded experience, but they can do that themselves, and which just makes sense, right? That's kind of
Sure.
the world, and I think COVID has sped up a lot of that too in other care settings. But when they come into the space, whether it's physical or virtual, that provider already knows that patient's background.
Okay.
They've read the medical history. In most cases, the care team has actually had a conversation about that patient before that visit, so that they can make the most of that patient's time, as opposed to the status quo today, which is, right, you fill out your paperwork online,
Right.
then you go to the practice.
And you may fill it out again when you
And-
get to the practice.
Exactly. They're going to have you fill it out again. Then an MA takes you back, and you do blood pressure and weight and vitals, right? And a general question of, why are you here today?
Yep.
You get into your exam room. Then they type up all of the things about your symptoms and why you're here today.
Right.
And then what does the doctor do? They come into there, and what's the first thing they say?
What are you in there for today?
What brings you in here today?
Yeah.
Right? And I'm like, well, I just told your practice that 5
That's right.
times.
That's
Don't
right.
you know?
That's right.
So at Betty's, they know.
Okay.
And so it just creates a better experience. And then the last thing I'll say about it is our visits are 40 minutes.
I was about to ask you, how long are the visits?
40 minutes, no wait time.
Because the model is 15 minutes, right, from a,
The model is
Typical
15
care.
minutes. They're always running behind because they stack patients,
right. That's right.
anticipating no-shows. So a provider might have, 3 patients in waiting rooms all at the same time, 3 or
Right.
4 patients. So
That's
they just
right.
boom, boom. So typically under 10 is what I expect when I go
Sure.
into a regular practice. Yeah, so Betty's is
But
40
40
minutes.
is, when you get, some of the things I've seen around what we should be doing, like, these type of visits, primary care wellness visits, is 30 plus to be able to take a proactive approach versus a reactive approach.
Exactly. And that's what we're focused on. It's just a better way to deliver care. The providers like it more, the patients like it more. And when we get comments from our patients,
Right.
that is the thing that they talk about the most. They're like, I felt seen and heard.
Sure.
My doctor really cared about me, or my provider really cared about me. And I got a lot of time, 40 minutes. I got all of my questions answered. And so there are other little nuances that we've changed about the experience too, to enable that time to ask questions or to even form questions.
Right.
So, really rethinking the
Because
care experience.
do you guys prime, I guess, for, at that age, right? There's a lot of questions they don't know to ask.
Exactly.
So do you have, curriculum's not the right word, but some sort of
Yeah.
just standardized, hey, it's your first visit, you're 15 years old, here's what we're going to talk about, so that way there's a proactive approach to it as well?
Yeah, we call them care templates.
Care
And they're, embedded in the EHR, and they've all been custom designed by the Betty's care team. So exactly, yep.
Perfect.
And so then you're right, it's standardized as the approach too.
Right.
So when you go from one provider to the next provider at Betty's, you get the same experience.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. What, I kind of wanted to back up a little bit as take the male perspective a little bit. What stigmas are young women faced with regarding getting care like this?
Yeah.
Because you don't see it.
Right.
And so, I'm sure in your research, right, you kind of be like, the need is massive. Isn't half the world basically women? And so, at least half the world needs, access to services about, women's health.
Exactly.
But you don't see it out there. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of those stigmas that you saw and how you guys how y'all address those, at Betty's?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest one is kind of back to that problem with women's health care in terms of the national conversation and most of the conversations really being so focused on pregnancy or the point of pregnancy. The problem with that is then it means that you need to be sexually active to become pregnant and therefore to get women's health care services.
Yeah.
And so then, you enter into that particular stigma of, goodness, is a woman going to a gynecologist because she needs birth control because she's sexually active?
Right.
And when that's actually, birth control is the number one medication or treatment for acne that is prescribed by dermatologists for teen acne for women.
Really?
Yes. And so you get into stigmas there that are based on society and religious beliefs, and it's generally uncomfortable for parents or older relatives or older members of society to think about young people being sexually active.
Sure.
Right? And so that's a valid concern. But the problem with that being a stigma around women's health care is, the average age for a girl to start her period is 12.
Wow.
And many start as young as 9. And so that female reproductive system, as I mentioned, that can determine so much about how she feels, how much sleep she gets, how much energy she has, how well what she wants to eat that day. And my favorite example is take a female athlete, a highly competitive female athlete. Let's say she's a high school on her way to being a college athlete. Depending on her cycle, that will affect how she performs. From 1 week. She might have a week where she feels super strong. She is like hitting her PR. She can outperform anyone. She's really competitive. And there's going to be a week where she's not going to feel that way. She's not going to be able to PR. Her body needs rest because her cycle has determined that. And if she knows that, that's okay. She just needs to know so that she can start to create some interventions to help her be more competitive in her sport.
Wow.
And it's the same thing if you're, for academics. It's the same thing for work and productivity. And so by equating women's health with sexual activity only, you're really diminishing all of these other areas. Mental health is a big one.
Sure.
We know that women by, between the ages of 14 and 25 are twice as likely to have depression and anxiety. That's actually that group is at the highest risk of severe mental disorders globally, and it starts at puberty or menstruation. Wow. So you can start to see that there is some type of connection between the female reproductive system and all of these other areas of a woman's wellness.
Right.
And again, if we're only thinking about pregnancy and sexual activity, we are excluding all of these other things.
Right.
It's a big, big, big problem. So we've got to reduce the stigma around that. And, I think also just the stigma around women being sexually active, because sometimes that lingers into, women later in their lives.
Sure. Let's talk about, so we've got the concept, and we've talked about your process of the research for the idea. When did things move from idea to actually implementing? When was that time frame? What was that like?
Oh, goodness. That was a very scary time, Matt. Very scary time. So I actually spent about 2 years just getting prepared, developing the business model, talking to all of the resources, financially planning to be out of work for a period of time until I had income again. And so that took about 2 years. So mid-2019, I left my full-time job to start Betty's. It was going pretty well. And at this point I thought, okay, I'm ready to get in front of investors and banks and start to source financing, which is one of the biggest challenges, right? Where's the money going to come from? Exactly. And I didn't have a perfect plan for that because I'm a first-time entrepreneur. Didn't really know exactly what that was looking like, but was doing research on it. And one of the things I knew is that I need to be doing this full-time before I can even go ask anybody for money. That was my big thing, is leave my job. So that was kind of the first step, was just preparing to leave my job and feel like I had enough momentum for Betty's to be able to do that. And so I did in, as I mentioned, summer of 2019. Then I started to kind of hit the fundraising route and figure out, how am I going to cobble together the funds that I needed for Betty's? I had my financial model, I had my business plan. Then I started to think through, what are the vehicles out there for capital for a startup?
Right.
For a number of reasons, I decided to go with an SBA loan. So then everything became, okay, how can we get an SBA loan? Because I wanted to keep ownership. I wanted to keep this vision for Betty's. I didn't want to dilute myself. And so I was able to softly secure some commitments from a few angel investors to do the upfront capital that was needed for an SBA loan.
Okay.
Right? 'Cause you can't just go and get all of your money from the SBA.
That's
You
right.
have to bring something to the table.
That's right.
And so I was like, oh gosh, how am I going to bring all this money to the table? We need a lot of money. We're a decently capital intensive
Sure.
business to start with.
Yeah, you're going to need
You
working.
know?
I mean, you got the build out, plus you've got
Yeah.
working capital that you need.
Right.
I mean,
And we're hiring decently expensive
Exactly.
resources. There's
That's
only
right.
so much bootstrapping we can do.
that's right.
And so I did that. We were feeling pretty good, we being myself and my husband, who was pretty involved in the business, had a separate job, but still pretty involved. So fast forward to 2020, kind of April 2020. I will never forget
That little thing called COVID.
that little thing called COVID. I will never, it was right around April 12th. And so, we're all, for March, I think everyone was like, just, what is this going to mean?
Mm-hmm.
What is this going to do? Okay, it's slowing some things down right now.
Right.
When's it going to turn around? Right. We didn't know how long it was going to take to get through that. And so April, though, I think is when people really started to, as you know, the restrictions all hit really hard. And we're like, okay, this isn't going away anytime soon.
Yep.
So the investors pulled out. They were hit pretty hard by what was happening because they owned gyms and restaurants and other consumer-oriented
Sure.
businesses. And then the SBA pulled all of their funding to the PPP.
Oh, wow.
So they weren't even doing startup loans,
wow.
the type that we were going after, which was a 7A. So mid-April, I am like a deer in the headlights. What do I do to get this business off the ground? I have no idea. So I just kept getting up every day and making phone calls and iterating on my business plan and trying to think through, okay, I've got this vision, I have this business plan and this model, I need this money, how am I going to get it? And we actually went back to the drawing board.
Okay.
And my husband, we went to see family over the 4th of July. So it was a few months later, just kind of spinning my wheels. That's what it felt like. And on our way back, he's the one who first said, I think we need to re-explore a mobile clinic. And
So you were just doing virtual care at the time before COVID?
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. I didn't mention that. So at this point, our model was a brick and mortar with a virtual supplement. So we were
Got
going to do
it.
virtual care,
Got
but
it.
we wanted to really create a
Very
boutique-like
capital-intensive to start that
experience.
first one.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So we needed about $1.7 million is what
Right.
we wanted. And we wanted to build out this kind of the awkward shop
Sure.
as the storefront, which
Okay.
we still want to eventually do.
Yeah.
And had a few exam rooms. So yeah, definitely capital intensive.
Got it.
And so then, and this was maybe one of the big lessons that we learned is, what's the first thing that you need to get to market? Because he said, what if we do a mobile? And we had always wanted to do that. It was part of the plans long term,
Sure.
but not right away.
Just to enhance access, not be the access.
Yep. So we had to flip it on its heels a little bit, and we figured out how in the world we could bootstrap it. And so we did. We put as much as we could personally into developing the brand. We found a tech developer to partner with and gave them some equity.
Okay.
We found our financial management group, gave them a little bit of equity, right? And then we ended up getting to the point of later in the year, another thing we bootstrapped was finding a medical director.
Okay.
Yeah, so found a partner that would help us with that hiring process and recruiting process for a physician.
Right.
Found a great physician, hired her in November.
Great.
And, just kind of cobbled together this team and this group that was incentivized to get Betty's off the ground.
Wow.
And then we had the mobile clinic model, redid our financials, and we had gone to a total of 7 banks. The 7th bank is the one who was like, okay, they had experience with mobile clinics specifically.
Oh, wow.
Saw success in the mobile clinic space.
Right.
And they said, yeah, we'll do this with you.
Interesting.
Uh-huh.
Because they needed some sort of asset and nobody else could figure out what the asset was that they were going to lean against.
100%. So we had the asset.
Yeah.
And all of the money that we had put into it personally at that stage, they actually counted that as the capital.
Really?
Yeah, they're like, what you've put into it to date, if you can show all of the receipts.
Can you share that bank?
And, oh, yeah, absolutely. It's BankMD. Please call them.
BankMD?
Yeah, they're part of Trans-Pecos Banks.
Oh, we deal with Trans-Pecos Banks.
Yep.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Found them to be super helpful.
Yeah, they are.
Much more, entrepreneurial, I think. So really supportive for founders. Highly recommend them. But yeah, so all those things lined up, right? And it was a big shift though, because we closed on that loan in June of 2021. And as I mentioned, I left my job in June of 2019.
Right.
So it took 2 years.
Yeah, everybody thinks, I see Betty's in the news and, I've never heard of it. Man, it's an overnight success. They don't really realize.
Right.
It took several nights before it was overnight.
Exactly.
There was a lot of nights before that.
Yeah, a lot of, and during this time, one other thing I'll say kind of about the founder's journey too is when I left my job in 2019, we had financial stability as a family for my husband to be able to carry on his work. But he unexpectedly lost his job at the same time.
Oh, wow.
And it was too late at that point. I mean, within a week, of it being my final, last 2 weeks of work, my replacement's coming in,
right.
I got to go, to, he lost his job unexpectedly, very unexpectedly.
Wow.
And so then we spent about 6 months with no income.
Wow.
And starting this business.
But it sounds like you had enough financial planning that you could make it through.
We did,
by the skin of your teeth, I'm sure.
By the skin,
time.
Exactly, by the skin of our teeth.
Well, let me ask you this. Let's kind of shift through to talking more about what it is to be a women founder, because being a women founder in a women industry. Mm-hmm. What sort of competition do you see, in that real, narrow segment between women? Yeah. What do you see in that?
Well, it's really interesting, because there are groups out there. So in general, kind of to start with, right, women get a very small percentage of venture funding.
Right.
Right, like 2%, maybe 2.5% is the latest number of all venture capital goes to companies that are founded by women.
Right.
Very, very small. Within the venture capital world, there are groups that are coming up that are really trying to support women founders. They're focused on, we know we need more women founders. Women founders also statistically are more successful. Their companies are more successful, more profitable. Could be because of all of the resilience that is needed just to get as far as you can, right? It's kind of, you're already separating the wheat from the chaff through that.
Right.
But not to say that women make better founders in general, just the process, right? So,
sure.
I think what I've found is that within the groups that are dedicated to supporting women founders, there's still a limitation, and then you only have women founders who are competing for the same pool of dollars from already a small group of people.
Right.
And it creates this interesting competitive landscape where it's like everyone wants to rally around each other and be supportive, but also, if you have a competing business out there on the market anywhere,
right,
you're like, well, somebody's already done that. So we're not going to invest in you because someone here is doing this, over here in California.
Right.
I'm like, well, they're not here in Texas right now, and
That's
Texas
right.
is freaking big.
And in many other industries, just because somebody else is doing it, it actually validates what they're doing versus, we shouldn't do that. Because if that was the answer, then we would never had a Facebook.
Right.
Because we had a MySpace.
Exactly.
Right.
100%. We would never have a Lyft because we have an Uber.
That's right.
We wouldn't have a Burger King because we have a McDonald's.
Right. But you see that in just what you're dealing with that's actually the excuse to not fund.
Yes, it is absolutely. And it does seem to be more unique for women-founded companies than men-founded companies.
Got it.
Because I see that with other female founders that I talk to.
That's interesting.
It is.
That they would do that.
Yeah.
Which, I guess what you'll see from that is if they are pushing you into, we're not going to duplicate or have competitiveness. What we'll see in the next 10 years is truly groundbreaking innovations that women have done because they really that's what they've been pushed into.
Right.
And they continue to find those things. So maybe in the next 10 years, we'll see a positive benefit, but it's an unfortunate thing right now.
Yeah.
What else do you see? Let's just talk about raising capital as a woman. 2%, the statistics, I've seen 2 to 4. Let's be honest, it's pennies compared to what,
Right.
Is in the market. How have you addressed that? Like, how has that personally impacted you? And as you approach fundraising, is there anything that you've done to kind of try to maneuver through that environment?
Yeah. What's interesting is I've heard from other female founders that I'm close to just about some very overt, kind of sexist comments that they've had. I, on the other hand, haven't had anything that is really jarring.
Okay.
I tend to get good comments. I tend to be treated with respect in the sense that I know what I'm talking about when it comes to my business.
Sure.
That said, I'm not getting checks, right? And I see that with a lot of other women founders, and that's what we try to talk to each other about is, okay, well, how did you manage this particular situation? Because no one's going to come out and say, well, I'm not going to invest in you because you're a woman founder.
That's right.
They probably don't know. It's probably a subconscious bias, and so some of the things that I've done some boot camps for women founders that I think have been really well informed for any women founders listening. There's one called Ad Astra Boot Camp out of San Diego.
Okay.
They're a really good one that kind of teaches some tools and techniques to change the conversation. One of the best examples that they used is women often get asked about mitigating like downside risk or mitigating risk in their business model, while men will get the same type of question, but it's all about what are the upside opportunities.
Oh, I see.
And so, and that was kind of a blind study that was done across, a number of pitch competitions and pitches.
Wow.
And so that's how it plays out for women.
Okay.
So it's not a very obvious,
It's not an
I'm not
overt,
gonna,
but it's still
But it's there.
It's there and it's there,
Yeah.
and then it's there in the results.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you, one woman founder I was talking to, she's actually a local founder of a biotech company. She was talking to a potential VC, and they looked at her. He looked at her, and he's like, "You're the most impressive CEO I've seen in a long time." But did he write a check? He did not write a check. So that there's a disconnect. And as a woman founder, we are constantly trying to find what is that trigger? What's that moment that is going to say, okay, is there an underlying objective in your line of questionings?
Sure.
That are your line of questions that I need to figure out so that I know how to give you the right information to help you understand my business,
Right.
but to also ensure that you have confidence in me as a founder.
Which is interesting because we've already talked about stigmas, and again, the male perspective. I don't know what women go through. I could tell you generally what I know, but I don't experience it, right? So do I know what the cycle is? Of course I know what the cycle is. Do I know how it impacts a woman? Not really, kind of.
Right.
Same thing, in investors, VCs, investors, invest in what you know. Well, there you go. Well, that causes a challenge when
Right.
you're dealing with women's focus because, probably 99% of venture capitalists are men.
Right.
What'll be interesting, though, and I don't know if you see it maybe in some of these groups you're in, is as women are now more into the startup world with successful exits, free cash that they then deploy through venture capital, is that, like, have you dealt with female venture capital groups and, had better success with them? Is that what bends the curve? Is there's more female venture capital or better diversity in venture capital firms? What do you think the cure is long term? I guess that's the question I was getting to.
I think that's the goal. Right now, again, that space is still pretty small and really competitive, that it's almost formed its own clique, particularly in the healthcare space, the women's healthcare space. It's like there's this core group of female investors who are founding companies and that, or who are deploying capital for women-owned healthcare companies.
Sure.
And they're nice and it's fine and they're excited about this space, but they're very selective. And
if you're in, you're in. If you're out, you're out.
It kind of feels like that.
Yeah.
It kind of feels like that. And then I was talking to another person in the women's health space who's a founder, and she made a really keen observation, which is, the women now who are exiting, who are founders who are exiting, they're not going into venture capital. They're not investing because they didn't make any money off of their exit, because they had a bad deal. Because women are more likely to have worse deals, even when they did get venture capital from, the group before, the cohort before of exited companies. And that's really interesting.
Yeah.
And so you don't yet have a quorum of female founders who have exited and made a lot of money that can then pay it forward.
Which makes sense because, regardless of, gender, people don't realize how early on their negotiations were really set the table of what it looks like for their exit as a founder.
Right.
I don't represent anybody. I don't represent any VCs, but we've got, a lot of companies that are venture backed, and I know a lot of them. And one of them was just telling me the other day that, they found this great company and the founder owned 1% of the company. Ugh. Because, the person had effectively over time diluted himself down to the point of, they own nothing. And they're largely just worked themselves into a job. Yeah. As opposed to, being a founder and having that exciting exit. And I would gather that based upon negotiations and some others for women founders, that early on, need for capital will take a bad deal just to get the access. Yeah. I didn't think about that. But that does make logical sense.
Yeah. And the female founders that I've seen who have been most successful, and these are the ones that are out there, on TV. They're the ones that have, their showcase on Business Week and that are being most talked about. They are entrepreneurs now, but they came from a VC world.
That's right.
So they were venture capitalists turned into entrepreneurs.
That's right.
And so then, maybe after they exit, they'll go back into venture capital. But for me as an entrepreneur, I was an operator, right? I was in this space developing my subject matter expertise in this space.
Which most startups are operators turned, an entrepreneur versus a VC jumping in.
And so that's even, I would argue, more difficult because to your point about, not diluting yourself to the point where you have no ownership, I even look back now and I'm like, oh, if I knew then what I knew now, I wouldn't have made that decision and diluted myself that much in this round. But also, I just want my business to launch. I just want to have my business.
Well, let's talk about one of those lessons real quick. Because you had mentioned, and I have this conversation with people from time to time, you went from bootstrapping to then needing more resources. Right. You mentioned the branding team. You mentioned financial. You needed a bigger team. And one of the things you mentioned was you gave some equity up.
Yeah.
What was the biggest lesson around that maybe you could share to those that are thinking, I need some more help. I need my sophistication level to go up, but I don't have any money. Yeah. Can you give maybe some tips to that?
Yeah, I would say if you're still in ideation, then don't. I would say try as best as you can, even with those early potential equity partners, to not put a valuation on your company. Try to come up with some other terms to then, determine that equity split later down the road when you do have a valuation, like a SAFE or a convertible note. I didn't think about using any of those vehicles when it came to sweat equity. And to be honest, as I'm not an attorney, so I don't even know if that would be appropriate for that. But I would say just try to either put caps on it to start, and then you can reevaluate if more work is needed. Sure. I'd say start smaller, put caps on it. If you can do something that doesn't allow or doesn't provide a valuation on your company early, then do that, because there's just no way to really know, right? You're just, it's play money.
Got it. We won't dig much into that, but that's a great advice, on a lot of those kind of, and there's even some programs, I've seen one before about like consulting for equity type of arrangements for it. And people need to realize too, these are like 1% to 3%ers, at max. These are not, even at an early stage, these are not, 10, 20, 30% to get an accountant on your team. That's not what those things are. They're more kickers in most aspects, so that way they go in then necessarily, compensation replacement for those people, which can be hard to do because, again, they want to know, well, how much is that worth in value to get those? Right. But no, that's a good feedback to think about on there.
But also do it. Yeah. I mean, don't, and that's another thing that I would say is go ahead and find partners that you feel like they really buy into your vision, right? And that they buy into you as a founder, right? Because if you're an entrepreneur, at some point you're you're calling the shots and you're guiding them, and you are the CEO, so you've got to make sure you're going to find partners that are going to respect your vision and that you can work with. It's a long relationship. It's a long-term relationship for the most part. So, and if it's not a long-term relationship, then the founder is the one on the losing end because you've given away this equity.
Right.
And then if you only have them for a short period of time, then you're doing yourself a disservice.
They're with you forever. Whether they only actually do the work for a short period
Exactly.
of time.
So find the ones that you enjoy working with and go ahead and do it and share your idea too. I think I do get that in some places it makes sense not to share your idea, especially if it's a very close competitor or that competitive scenario could be really disruptive to you. I would say I wished I would have shared my idea a little bit sooner. Than I did. I think I held a little bit too close to the vest early on.
Yeah. No, usually we say, like people say, non-disclosure agreements from a legal standpoint, right? One, they're only as good as the piece of paper you've got. Two, the question is, if it's something very highly technical, like a tech company, like their tech stack and those things, well, that's very technical. But the concepts and stuff, and now largely the market is like that. We share ideas and pitch decks, and those things go around, and nobody's going to sign an NDA for those for a concept.
Exactly.
And people should realize, the more you talk, the easier it is sometimes to find those that are like-minded and raise capital. Yeah, could somebody copy you? That's true, but somebody can copy just about anything, that was out there. So to take off that risk and just, share away.
Yeah.
What about with regard to just pitching? We've talked. You were at Tech Fuel. Saw you at Tech Fuel. You were fantastic. Give some feedback on, again, you're moving from ideation. At that time, though, y'all were actually operating when you were at Tech Fuel, right? You were going to the mobile clinic, if I remember right.
We were just virtual care only at that point.
Okay. I guess it was right after that I saw the mobile thing.
Yeah.
But talk about pitching and how you had to go. Community fund. I remember you won the community fund. I didn't see that. Give some tips on that initial time you started pitching your concept, because you've had this in your mind for years at that point in time, right?
Right.
And now you go to the day that you got to pitch somebody on it. Can you talk some tips maybe for people about that?
Absolutely. So in my previous marketing career, I had done a lot of sales decks. That was one of my things. I was a product marketer.
There's a leg up right there on a sales deck with a pitch deck.
Yes, exactly. So, and what's funny is I kind of did approach it like a sales deck, right? So you have your problem, your solution, and then your kind of pricing structure, differentiators, those types of things, right, to really sell it.
Very textbook, formulaic approach.
Exactly. So that's how I approached my pitch deck. I put it in front of someone who is in the startup community here. Great person, took a meeting with me. He was with Geekdom. This was before the community fund. Actually, he's the one that said, you need to pitch at the community fund. So I put it in front of him, and he's like, nope, there's too much information on it. I can't. It's way too much. So then I was like, okay, cut. So I did. So that's the first thing, right? Put it in front of somebody else who is in the space, the startup space, who is either a VC who is maybe not in your stage and is going to give you really unbiased advice. Maybe you want to tease them for later. Or someone who's at an incubator or an accelerator program who can just take a meeting and be like, hey, can you look at my pitch deck?
Yep.
And there are lots of resources out there that can give people a good idea. One website is called Shockwave Innovation.
Shockwave Innovation.
Gordon Doherty, he's one of the co-founders of Capital Factory. We're a portfolio company there. His website is chock full of amazing free information. So I'll give him a little shout out. Buy his book, but you don't have to buy his book because it's all on his website. All right, he's got a great pitch deck. So get some resources, look through those. Yeah. I'm still learning. I have a great pitch for big pitch competitions, right? So, and with tips for that, for a pitch competition type environment, I write a script. I memorize that script. I treat it like theater. I bounce it off of a few different people and practice. And that has given me a leg up so that I'm really confident when I go into that situation of exactly how it's going to flow.
Right.
I don't leave anything to chance. I don't do anything off the cuff. I don't just do bullet points. I script it out. I do think a pitch deck changes depending on the audience.
Sure.
And depending on where you are in the life cycle of your company. So if you're pitching like I'm for early stage, a lot of what I've seen, the resources available online, are good for companies that are like at Series A.
Sure.
Series A metrics are really different than seed metrics.
Right.
And I've had to learn that, but I've also had to learn to bridge the gap between before revenue, I'm not a revenue generating company yet.
Right,
I'm
so
not
I
an
can't show you
idea.
traction.
Yeah. I can't show you traction. I
Right.
have stuff. I mean, my company is moving forward, but I don't know how to get these metrics that you're asking for.
Right.
So what does traction really mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that is a constant iteration. I feel like every time I have my pitch deck done, somebody else comes up and they're like, actually, you should do this. I just completely redid my pitch specifically for one-on-one investor meetings.
Well, yeah. I mean, Alfred from Deck Savvy was here, does a lot of decks, and he's helped me, clients, with various things. I mean, he was basically saying you have like a handful of decks, and they're all iterative processes, for these. It's a continually living, breathing document.
Yes.
So that hits home exactly,
Right.
What he was saying. Mm-hmm. I've got one last question for you, but it's a big question. I've been waiting for the entire time to ask it. It's okay. I think.
Okay, let me drink my water.
You'll be just fine. What's the solution to solving the women's funding problem that we have here for startups?
Oy vey, that is a big question.
It is. And we can dream big, right? Let's
Solution.
just pretend there's no limits, and it's probably not practical at this point in time, but what is it?
My goodness, that's a really tough question because a part of me wants to say, put it as a benefit on the due diligence. Is it a woman? Yes. You get an extra little plus if you're a woman. Not because, it's not to add to the sexism of that, but because statistically speaking, women founders are more successful, and that should be an attribute. Women more likely to be successful. Yes.
So it needs to be more incorporated into the financial model, right? I mean, these VCs, when they do that, they look at risk. They do projections. They're going to look at what the potential return is.
Right.
You're saying is y'all need to realize that there needs to be a little bit of a bump of that return because of the women as opposed to the negative number you're putting on it now.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
I think that's a big thing. I also think a big thing is, I've been on a little bit of a soapbox about this lately.
Be on it.
Because we are a mission-driven company.
Yeah.
We have a big goal. We have a really big mission. And there are a lot of funds out there that are impact funds.
Right.
They want to use their money for good.
Yep.
Kudos to them. I love that. Mm-hmm. However, are you willing to sacrifice a percentage point on margins to do that? And the answer is no. They want to do impact funding, but they want to get the same margins that you're going to get on a B2B SaaS
Right.
platform that
That's right.
Is not doing anything but making someone's job a little bit easier, and so therefore you can make a lot of money off of that. So I would also say, to the venture capital folks, like, if you say you're an impact firm, then you kind of need to put your money there, and it doesn't mean you're not going to be profitable.
Right.
Like, sure, go after profitable businesses that are going to give you returns.
Right.
But is it a 5x instead of a 7x? And is that okay?
Right.
And I think it should be if the mission is big enough.
Well, so I didn't know you were going to put us on there, but we're on there, so we'll go on the soapbox together. The impact funds, right? When they do that, a lot of them, they just use it to differentiate and
Right.
try to give somebody a feel good, so that way they can get a bit larger, LP base. But if you look at all the great, just go back to business school, management school, the Good to Greats, all these great books that we have in
Yep.
leadership. They talk about those that were mission driven, outperforming their peers, right?
Yes.
Okay. So if I'm an impact fund, then why wouldn't I be looking at those with strong mission, strong operational, willing to take the risk for a smaller, but betting on the mission and the market as opposed to my financial model and return? That would be, sorry, I knew you.
It makes
this is
sense.
passionate to me too.
Right.
Is if you bet on the
It's a better
right
business.
mission, then and the operation of it, your margins are fine.
Right.
And you're going to do more greater, right?
Yes. Like our business in
That's a whole
particular.
other part of the VC world that I have another
I didn't realize I
soapbox.
was going to open up that door. I love it.
Hold on, I'll get
love
myself
it.
back off that chair real quick on it. But I agree with you. And
Right.
the other thing too is, and this is specifically in impact funds, because traditional VC can look at things like what Betty, companies like what Betty's doing and say, well, that's going to do a lot of good, but I know tech, I don't know that, right? But an
Right.
impact fund
Right.
should be looking at what's the impact
Yes.
economically as well as whatever that mission is, and judging both.
Yes.
Because I believe that those type of funds should be generating what their missions are of their portfolio companies as
Right.
well as the financial return. Doing
Right.
good and doing well.
Right.
They can't just do well and say, well, but we get to feel good. They have to do good too. All right.
Good too.
I'm completely.
I love
off
it.
now.
I love it.
I was
No,
trying to go for
right.
that last one for you, but man, that ended up rippling back. Well, what's next for Betty Co? What do you see over the next year that's exciting, and what are y'all doing? Share all that. Let's end on that piece.
Well, I'm really excited because we're moving into the first kind of fall semester with having kind of Betty's fully launched. We've got our mobile clinic. We are going.
And COVID basically back in the background, so people are out there living
COVID is
normal
in the background.
lives.
It's
That's
true.
great.
This is actually the first time in 2 years that I have had a typical San Antonio rush hour. Right? It took me an extra 40 minutes to get to my location
Wow.
one morning. It's like, oh, I haven't experienced this in a long time.
That's right.
And it's because the school's
Yeah.
semester has started. And
That's
so, with that, we think that's going to be big growth for Betty's. We're really targeting colleges, college students to be able
Sure.
to serve them. But within the next year, right, Austin is already knocking at our door. So we're going to try to put a mobile clinic in Austin as soon as possible. We've got 5 locations lined up, which is extremely exciting. So then we'll be in 2 markets. We are fundraising right now, which I am excited for the fall, which is, apparently a better check writing season than summertime.
That's better.
Yeah, right? And so with those funds that we get from that, we'll really be able to grow strategically and intentionally, and then,
And impact a whole lot of young
Impact a
women's
whole lot of
which
lives,
is
right?
a huge thing.
which should be almost 12,000 by the end of 2023.
12,000. Do you have a number
Women.
that you're like, okay, this is a number, like a big number that's out there? That
Oh, I love that. I don't. It's more based on locations.
Okay.
So
I just wonder, not per
Yeah.
year, right? But, going back to that impact thing,
Well-
one day just pick a number and be like, 10 million.
Right. Well, that's the
Even
other thing
1
I was thinking
right?
with your question specifically about, what is the thing that's going to change kind of funding women's women-owned companies. I really think some of it is take the women piece out of it. Like we are a women-founded company for women plus. And so if we had VCs or anybody just look at the numbers, the market size and the numbers, not thinking about, right, because there's already this mindset of like exclusivity. It's probably the same for our customers too. Well, yeah, but what about the guys? Can you not serve the guys too with your service? Like, well, they don't really need this. We don't need the same services. Like,
That's right.
It's okay to be different.
Yes.
But if you look at the numbers, I mean, we have a 20 million person market. There are 20 million women between the ages of 15 and 24 in the U.S.
20 million.
20 million. And you know how many of those women need Betty's services? All of them.
Yeah.
Absolutely all of them need our services. Now, are we going to be best designed for every single one? No, that's okay. But if we capture 10% of that market, just 10% of the market, that would be incredible. So kind of in any market that we go to, we're aiming to get to 10%. So in San Antonio, there are 109,000 women. So if we could serve 10,000 women in San Antonio, that would be really exciting for us.
I see. That makes sense. It'll be exciting when you get to your, 100,000, 1 million, 10 million. Those
Yeah.
are all the great
Oh, those are the great
things.
numbers.
Those would be awesome.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for coming and being on this
thank you.
podcast. This has been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. If you're watching us on YouTube, click subscribe. Leave us a comment. We have in the description, we'll have the information to get a hold of Betty's. And you'll see that in all of our social postings. If you're listening to us online, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, same thing. Leave us a comment, subscribe, let us know we're providing value. And until next time, we'll see you then.